Alright, so this is going to be a video series on building submarines in Barotrauma using Submarine Editor. First off, an important thing to note about the Submarine Editor in Barotrauma and just building submarines in Barotrauma in general is it's not going to be like a game like KSP, Kerbal Space Program, or Crossout where you have like two objects, right, and you like snap them together. And then because those two objects are snapped together, they interact mechanically, like a fuel tank to an engine or anything like that. It's much more visually based, and then after you have you want it to look like visually, you can go in and kind of link everything together and make it work. So when you're building a submarine, you really want to focus on just making it look like visually good, and then pretty much no matter what you make, you'll be able to make it work like mechanically later on. So just getting that out of the way at the beginning. If you load into the Barotrauma Submarine Editor, you just get a blank canvas. So first thing I would do is hit the open button up in the top left there and load up one of the default submarines in here. You'll see I have a lot of the default ones like Orca and the Remora and all these, as well as some different ones like ones that I've built or ones that I've downloaded from the Steam Workshop. So I will open the Remora here because I think it looks like a pretty cool submarine. So maneuvering around in this editor, you can scroll your mouse wheel to zoom, and you can use WASD to move around your view, kind of pan. Alternatively, you can click in on the mouse wheel, so click the middle mouse button and drag in order to drag your canvas around. On the left here, you have lots of buttons. Up here, you have character mode and wiring mode, which are things that I'll cover later. But first off, over here are visibility buttons. So I can like check lighting, and this will show what the lighting will look like on the submarine once I'm actually loaded into a game. But usually when you're building, if you're not working on the lights, you want to leave that unchecked because that way it gives like a diffuse lighting that allows you to see everything very clearly. You can take away the walls, which will take away like the shell, like the hull of the submarine, as well as most of the inner bulkheads. And then it continues on. Structures will take away those back walls and fins and stuff. Items are mostly interactable items, so like ladders and engine, things that your character will interact with when they're in the game. You have waypoints, which are a very confusing mechanic that has to do with allowing AI, so like the crew member characters in single player or any bots that you spawn to be able to maneuver around the submarine. They're important but rather confusing, so just usually leave them unchecked. Spawn points are pretty straightforward. They just show you where characters will spawn when you load in, as well as where boxes of like supplies when you buy items will spawn. So it's pretty straightforward. Holes are what define what's inside of the ship and what's outside of the ship, because like I was saying earlier, this is all visual, right? Like without holes, this means nothing. The game would read this, if I had no holes down, as just all water, and you would load in and you just get crushed by pressure immediately. So holes actually define what's inside of the ship and what's outside of the ship, and placing them down is very important, and getting the work together is important. On top of the holes is the gaps, which define like where gaps are between holes. Like right here, I don't have a wall, so I need to put a gap down showing that water can pass between these two hole sections here, as well as it defines like changeable gaps, like doors will automatically place down a gap that is like when the door is closed, there's no gap there, so water will not go back and forth. But when you open it, it generates a gap there. Water can freely flow back and forth, as well as your ducts, which allow water to travel through the like floor and stuff like this, so that you can drain your rooms. When I'm working, I always start with visual, like I was saying, so I just keep those unchecked, as well as links usually. So I'm just really worried about these, and then this once I actually start working on the lighting. To bring items into the canvas here, you simply just click on them, and then you don't have to click and hold or anything. You can just click and then move your mouse around. So if I want to work on like these outer bits here, which are called shells, the outer hull, and just type shell into here and grab it, put it in the viewport. If I click, it'll place it. And then if I right click, that just clears it away so I can go do something else. To move objects, you click on them and then you click again and drag to move them around. And you can see they kind of like snap. So it is on a grid, sort of, in order to move around. To delete objects, you press the delete key, not the backspace key, but the delete key. So if you don't have a number pad on your keyboard, I don't know if you'll have a delete key, but hopefully you will. Press delete, they go away. Sometimes if you put an object in here and then you start messing around with these settings, like let's say I just changed my scale, which you can do simply by pressing the plus button on your scale. Now let's say I press delete, it doesn't delete. So that just means I need to select off of it, reselect on it, and then I can delete, and that'll bring it back. Another useful thing is previously used. So if you've been like placing a bunch of things and then you're like, oh, I need one of those things, but I don't want to have to go search for it, you can just find it back here, click on it, and that puts it there. So you can see I was messing around with some alien objects earlier, so I can easily grab those if I want them. Selecting objects is pretty straightforward. It's like most editing softwares. You just click to select an object and then you can move it around or manipulate it over here. If you want to select multiple objects, you can hold down Control and then click on another object and that will select it. So you can select like these 3 objects, and then if I click and drag these, it moves them all together uniformly. Alternatively, you can use the drag selection box, which is just like any other drag selection box. Whatever it's covering, it selects all of them. So there, I've selected all but that one, and I can drag these around. Alright, so when you have objects in your viewport, in your canvas here, so let's say I have let's just grab a wall, right? So let's grab one of our horizontal walls in here, and I put this down, and then I click on it. I have all these options on the right side here. For an object like this, that is just a visual object plus a collision box, there's not too many options that I can do. It's mostly just changing visually what it's going to look like. You can name it something, which is useful if you want to remember what something is used for in your submarine. But visually here we have scale. That's simple. This will also be scaling up the collision box on this. So you can do that. You can change that all you want. And then you have texture scale, which will be changing the texture scale but not the collision box. So if I up that, this is on the X coordinate, it's stretching it in the X direction. So if I wanted it stretched for some reason, I can do that. You can also shrink it way down so it's like super dense looking. And then same thing here in the Y, I can stretch it in that direction, but you'll notice that it stretches down, but like stays within the collision box of the object here. And then if I shrink it, it will tile the texture so that it looks like I have multiple stacked on top of each other. So if you wanted that for some reason, you can do that. These texture manipulations will be much more used when you're working with walls, which are these objects. These are like, it's literally just a flat texture that you can drag out to whatever size you want. And this is what's put on like the back of a submarine to show like the back walls. These ones using texture, scale, and offset is a lot better because it's just a square and it's not going to tile the texture the same way. It will tile the texture, but the textures are a lot bigger, so they don't tile as fast. And it's mostly used like if I have one wall here and then I have another one that's right here that kind of goes up higher than this one, and I want them to align, I can use my texture scale and offsets to get them to align. So here I'm going to hit reset to prefab in order to get the scale back to normal, and that way they both have the same scale. And so now I can use my offset here. If I go move my Y up, then I can get them to align, but you'll notice they don't quite align perfectly there. So that's because this is going by increments of 10. So if I just go in here and type 65, I should be able to get them to align pretty perfectly, and that's fairly unnoticeable. So that's what that's used for. Again, you can always hit reset to prefab. That resets everything to default. And then just delete with the delete key. A very important tool when you're working with really anything, but I must find myself using that when I'm doing the hulls of the ship. Anything that is like curved or slanted is using the flip X, flip Y. It's called mirror X, mirror Y. It's just what it says. If I mirror this, it just flips all the pixels in the X direction, so it's facing the other direction. Same thing for Y. So that's very useful when you're building your submarine, because if you have like this here, and then you want this to be on the bottom end, you put this in, and then you just mirror Y, and then you have it facing the opposite direction in how you want. So copying and pasting objects in Barotrauma submarine editor is useful, because that way, let's say I put in a shell over here, and then I searched up something like a vertical wall. And then, so now I have a vertical wall in here, and I'm like, oh shoot, I need another one of these under here. I instead of having to come back down here and retype shell, find my 17-degree one and put it in there, I can simply, well, for one, I could grab it I've previously used, but even easier is to just copy this. You can do this by hitting Control C for copy, and then Control V for paste. You can also do that with Control X, which is cut, so that makes it go away, but now it's stored in the clipboard, so if I Control V, it'll paste it in there. I don't really see how that's that useful in Barotrauma, because I could just, click and drag it instead of cutting it and then pasting it, but I guess it has its uses. But the easiest way to just copy objects is to hold down Control and then click and drag, and then release, click, and that way you have two of them. You need to be careful when doing this though, because if I hold down Control, click and drag on this, but then I release Control before I release my click, it just moves it instead of copying it. So you need to do Control, click and drag, release your click, then release your Control. That will copy it. And then I can mirror my Y, do whatever I want with this. Now you'll notice here that this object is in front of this object, right? It's like on top of it. So this sprite, this texture here, is loaded behind this texture. And that is determined by this here sprite depth parameter. So if you push this all the way up to 1, that's pushing it all the way back. So that means anything that I put here is going to be in front of that object. And then alternatively, if I pull this all the way down to 0, that's going to be in front of every object that I place. So they default to numbers that usually make sense for what they are. Like these ones are usually going to be in front of most things. So that's why it defaults to such a low number. But previously I was messing around with this one's sprite depth somewhere else, and that means when I click and drag that in, it saved the sprite depth of the last one that I was messing with. So they do like continue on. So if I want these behind here, I just hit plus a couple times to push it to a value that's higher than this one's sprite depth, and thereby it's behind this, and then it's hidden. This is very useful just for making things look, because this is a 2D game, but that's what allows you to make things look 3D. So when you have objects that are like connected to each other like this, it's usually pretty simple. You can just put your object in however you want to do it, and then you just click it in there, and like I said, it kind of moves around on this grid, so you just find whatever grid placement makes them align. And usually they align pretty perfectly. Like that looks quite nice. Same here if I grab like this object here, which I can click and drag to make longer or shorter. Again, they line up quite nicely there. But they don't always line up perfectly. Like if I start using some of these ones are notorious for leaving this damned little gap there. And so that's kind of annoying. One way to combat this is by overlapping it, because you can't really tell, right? But alternatively, if you don't want to do the overlap, because for whatever reason, you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard. If you select an object and you start placing the arrow keys, it moves it by like 1 pixel, probably more than 1 pixel, but it's by very small increments. So you can get things to line up more precisely that way. The only thing I would caution you about this is that if I start using my arrow keys, like let's say right here, I didn't like that gap and I want to get rid of that, I hit my arrow key just twice there to move it over. And then I start building on top of this. So let's say I put a a horizontal one here, and then I'm gonna put some sort of other bent bit over here. What will happen, and this isn't really illustrating it very well, but if you watch my other video, it illustrates it pretty well, is that I now am going to have to be using those arrow keys a lot more just to make things align, because things will start like snapping together like that if you've used the arrow keys earlier, and then it's like you're forced to use the arrow keys kind of, which isn't a bad thing. It just takes a bit more effort. So if you can get away without using the arrow keys, it will usually make your job a little bit easier going forward, but arrow keys are very useful nonetheless. Alright, so here I'm going to be covering a little bit about holes. So hole is an object that you can search in your items here. If you just type hole, you get hole. You see there's no texture there because it has no texture. So if I click my visibility on holes, so I'll be able to see it, and then I click on this, I get this nice little grid with this nice little axes. Holes are going to be put down as squares. So you can drag out any sort of size here, and it's just this big blue box. And so anything within here is not going to have water in it unless the shell that it's close to, this like next to, is breached. Like if it's been welding torched or gotten by mud crawler or whatever, then it will let water into this hole. So if you have, for holes, you want to have a separate blue box for every room inside of your ship, right? So I wouldn't want to make the hole for this ship look like this. Because then if like right here got breached, it would just flood through these doors. It wouldn't recognize these doors as being an object that would block water. So you need to have your hole be individual for each room. So you'll want to make that like this probably. That so it goes. It is overlapping with each door, which will be important when I talk about gaps here in a second. So I've got my hole for my center bit there, and then I'm going to also be building a hole for this edge bit here. And you do want your holes to butt up against each other, because that way you won't have a gap full of water when you try and walk through this door here. Because if you do that and you walk into that, your character will like get caught in this high pressure water that is somehow in the middle of your ship. So make sure your holes come up against each other. And then here, since I have this slant here, I'm going to use this to be multiple holes, even though it is just one room. That way I don't have this sticking way outside the bottom of the ship, because then there'd be no water in here, which is outside the ship. So I'll do it like that. Alright, so then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I just take the hole, make sure it's up against that hole, drag it out to about there, put in my second hole right there. So now this is good, but since these are two separate holes, if something gets breached here, this will fill up, but then there'll just be this invisible force field holding the water out of getting into this hole. So that brings us to gaps. Gaps, again, object that you can search for. It has the same like no texture that holes have. Make sure you select gaps visibility over here. And you'll immediately notice when you select gaps visibility that we already have a couple. This red thing here is a gap. And this is a specific kind of gap that is linked to this here door. Doors that are between holes are going to automatically generate a gap. Like if I remove my holes, so I can select my door here, move it over here, and then bring my holes back, you'll notice that this gap isn't really like, it doesn't really know what to do. It only has one arrow over here, so it's kind of confused. So you want to, that's why I was saying you got to make sure that your hole kind of overlaps your door, so that your gap spans the two holes. So this gap is, it will allow water through if the door is open, and if the door is closed, then it will not. And so it looks like both of our gaps were generated well here. Sometimes when you do this, you'll only get one of these arrows, and then all you really got to do is just select your door, delete it, and then just go grab it again. I should have it beside here somewhere. There it is. And then I can just place it back in, and that will usually fix it, although in this case it's actually broken it. But there, now that I've clicked on it, it looks to have generated a gap, so we should be good there. But we do need to put a gap in here, so you click on your gap, You need to put it a little bit to one side, drag it over so it's overlapping both the holes. Bring it down. Generates this here is like a blue gap. It's good. We know it's working because it's both arrows. This means water will freely flow between those two. Simply do the same on this side, and you've got your two gaps, and that is beautiful. Another issue you might run into is issues with sprites. When you flip their textures, when you flip their Y, X, they can get a little bit messed up. I've only ever had this happen to me with guns, coil guns, and the rail guns. I haven't really messed around with the other weapon systems, but it might be a weapon system sort of bug. So I encountered this when I was trying to edit the Orca, because it's a good looking ship. I like its maneuverability and all, but the problem is that it only has guns on the bloody top of the submarine, which makes it difficult to fight anything on the bottom. So I was like, okay, well, this is easy. I'll just toss a couple guns on the bottom, right? So I just got in here, copied this gun over here, put it down here, flip my Y, but I'm like, wait, that doesn't look right. The gun's not facing the right direction. And so initially I was like, okay, this is probably just an issue with my minimum and maximum, right? Because right now I have it told that its maximum angle is still within the ship here. So I was like, okay, put my max over here at 180, and my minimum over here at 0. That should fix it, right? But it didn't fix the sprite. The sprite was still facing the wrong direction. And when I loaded into the game, it was still looking weird. But then I saw this button over here that said reload sprite. So I was like, sweet, I'll just reload the sprite. But now it's like all gone. And if I actually look in here at some of the weapon systems here, like this electrical discharge coil, it no longer has a texture. Like it really screws up the sprite system sometimes. It was like, alright, maybe if I just keep clicking reload sprite, that'll fix it. Didn't really fix it. I tried putting an electrical discharge coil in, but I couldn't even see it. It wasn't there. It's just invisible. So then I selected that. If I reload this sprite, that sometimes fixes everything. In this case, it did not. It did fix the electrical discharge coil, but it appears to not have fixed this one here. Sometimes that fixes it though. It's clicking reload sprite on a different object. So this one's still messed up, but I might be able to save this. The way that I've found to fix this usually is to reload the submarine. So you'll need a save. Clicking up here, I'm going to save this to be something other than called the Orca. Because if I save this as the Orca, then the original Orca will be lost. So I'll say this is Orca test. Right? I click save. Saved Orca test.sub. We're good, and now I can go back, exit our submarine editor, reopen the submarine editor, click open, find my Orca test, which should be right here. Load that in and see if it's fixed. It has not fixed. Now the base here is facing the wrong way. So I can try and click reload sprite, but that's still messed up. And now it's like completely messed up. If I mirror my Y again, maybe. Alright. My minimum maximum is messed up again. If I bring this all the way over here, 0. Oh, but now it's facing the complete opposite direction. I want my maximum, or I want my minimum to be over here at 180. And I want my wait, what? No, I want my minimum at 0. Nope, that's facing the wrong direction again. I do not understand how these things work. There. That's what I want, right? Should now be facing in that direction. Reload sprite. Alright, well, let's try this again. Save. Back. Yes. Submarine editor. Open. Orca test. Alright, now it appears to be good. I don't know if there's like one step in what I just did there that fixes it or what is going on there. But usually if I get in the correct orientation, in theory, get my minimum maximum set and reload it, it usually fixes it. If somebody knows the actual fix of this, feel free to tell me. That would be awesome. Alright, so moving on to items, which are interactables by the character, or equipment, I think is what it's usually under in here. I like to just kind of lump them all in as items though. So that's, you know, any sort of thing that the character will be able to click on and interact with. The main things you need to know about these is wires for if those are needed, but I'll go over that later. Links and item assemblies. So links are pretty straightforward. Objects that are interacting somehow need to be linked. So for example, coil guns and coil gun loaders need to be linked, right? As well as the oxygen generator and the oxygen vents, the vents here. You don't have to run tubing to every single vent. You just click the vent down and then you link them. So the way you link objects, so here I'll just use this. Let's grab a coil gun loader to connect to my new coil gun that I've tossed down there. I'm just gonna put this somewhere stupid because I don't really feel like finding a place nice for it. All you gotta do to load or to link them is I click on one of them, and then up here you see it says hold space and click with mouse to link to another item. So if I just hold space and click with my railgun or with my coil gun, it links them. You'll notice that if I hold space and try and click on the navigation terminal, you get this red line here, and that means that like it tried to link it, but it said no. Like that's not going to accomplish anything. So I can just hold space and click again to get rid of that link. So that means now this coil gun loader is connected to this coil gun. We're good. That's all you need to do. There are a couple other options. Like right here, we have a navigation terminal and a status monitor, which we have linked by holding space and clicking. But you notice that's a different color right there. And that is because there is this option which allows them so that when you're in the navigation terminal, you also see the display for the status monitor. So that's in here somewhere. Here it is. So that is because we've checked this button here, display side by side when linked. So clicking that object will allow it that if I click on either of these, it'll show both of their displays. You'll see if you hover over this that it does have a little like warning that says it's possible or even likely that the views block each other if they're not designed to be viewed together. So like if I did the navigation terminal and this periscope, I don't even know if it'll, it won't even allow me to link those two. But if I were to try and link those and then do that, they didn't code it into the game that those would be separate, so they'll probably block each other. I haven't really seen any other uses for this other than navigation terminal and status monitor, but I also haven't done that much experimenting with linkages. Alright, so item assemblies are very important. There's many actually built-in item assemblies in the game, like indoors, for example. You have all of these ones here that have a little delete on them. They're all item assemblies. And all that means is that it's an item plus, it's like multiple items that are all linked together and wired or whatever. So like, for example, this door here, which is an automatic window door, closes automatically after 10 seconds and has a motion detector. So this just means that if I click this down, you notice that it comes, if I get rid of my walls and my structures real quick here so we can see my item, it comes with buttons, as well as all of these components, all these programming components, and they're all already wired together, so that I don't have to go and wire them manually. Very, very useful. You'll see it can be annoying because there I've deleted the door, but I've left all of my and components and stuff here, so you have to delete all of them, and then you have these buttons, and you gotta get rid of them, and yeah, that should do it. Alright, so if I bring my structures and my walls back, you can make these item assemblies. So let's say you make a door that, I don't know, you can operate by pushing a button here, but the door is down here. So like, as the captain, you can like close the door down here from right here. Let's say, I don't know, you've made that. You can save that as an item assembly and then be able to put it in later. The most common use for this that I've found is just like this coil gun loader right here, right? It doesn't have any coil gun ammunition in it, but I want there to be coil gun ammunition in it. One thing I can do is just copy this over, but I'm gonna, whenever I build a submarine, if I put a coil gun loader in there, I'm gonna want it to come preloaded with ammunition. So instead of loading this in, what I'll do is I'll take my coil gun loader, right, and I will then head over into character mode, which is a whole nother thing. If I go into character mode, it gives you an inventory, you'll notice, which just means that if I like click on this cabinet, right, I have all of these objects. I can take them out, drag them, put them into my inventory, or I can put items into that. So let's say this cabinet right here, let's say I wanted there to be some batteries in here to run these flashlights and stuff. I can go outside of character mode, search up the batteries. I want these battery cells. I can just click a couple of these down like this, head over into character mode, pick them up by clicking on them, so now they're in my inventory. And then I can click on my cabinet here and just double click them into my cabinet. And now I have my batteries, and I can even just put them into my headsets and my flashlights already. So that's what we'll do over here. We'll exit our character mode. We'll search up coil gun ammunition here. I'll just click one of those down into character mode, pick it up. Now it's in my hands. Click on my coil gun loader. Now it has, or wait, I missed the coil gun loader there. I clicked on the fire extinguisher. Coil gun loader, and then I can just drag that in or double click it in, and then boom, it's in there. So now if I exit character mode, now this is the object that I'm going to want to put in a lot of my submarines. First thing I should do here is, so if you click on it, you'll see this button appear. It's save as item assembly, right? Click on it, press save as item assembly. You get a dialog here. You name it. So this will be, I'll just call this full coil gun loader. I can give a description if I want, but that's all the description I need. I save that. Now if I type in coil gun, I'll also see this one, full coil gun loader. And then if I click this and place it in, you see it comes with coil gun ammunition all the way in it, already in it. And then if you delete these item assemblies, it does say delete the items that are inside of it. You can say no, and that'll leave the box there, or you can say yes, and that will remove the box. So now I can just relink this to my gun by holding space and clicking, and it's ready to go. Another important thing to do in character mode is like objects that might not default to on, like these pumps here, right? If I'm in here, there's no button that says like start as on, right? So the way I want to make that default to on is I just go to character mode, I click on it, and I just drag this up to on. Then it stays on. I can also set its initial in or out, but that's all controlled by the helm, so I won't even bother. So you can click that to on, and then you can exit character mode. That way when you load into the submarine, that will already be on. You won't have to go down there with your character and turn it on. You can see these wires are left here from when I spawned that door in, which is super annoying. There's like 100 of them, but I think I got rid of them all. This is different, you'll notice, than like lights. Lights, I don't have to go into character mode to make sure they default to on. Here I can just click this button, is on or not. So if I turn on my lighting here, you can see that it's on. If it's off, then it'll look like that. So if you want a light to start as on, click that. Simple as pie. Alright, the next thing I'll go over is wiring mode, which is much more complex, but I'll just kind of go over the basics of it. So I'll use the example of wiring a periscope to a gun here. So right, because I have my new gun, I'll find my periscope here, and again I'm just going to toss it down somewhere stupid because I don't feel like finding a good place for it. Let's put it right there. Here's my periscope, and this is going to be needed to be wired here so that I can control this gun from this here periscope. So I can do that by going into wiring mode. Wiring mode is pretty much the exact same as character mode, except that you spawn with a screwdriver and you have the option to put wires into your inventory. Yeah, it's simple as that. So right now I'm going to be wiring so that the signals from this will be going into here to control it. So for signals, I always like to use blue wires, and for power, I like to use red wires. You can do whatever you want. There's lots of options for colors. So to start wiring, I just click E on it, like I'm in the game, to rewire. I can see my my little wire here. So I'm going to, let's wire the trigger first, right? Because that's nice and simple. I'll take the signal from the trigger on this here periscope, and then I will right click to exit that, and I can drag that over here to connect here. So I could just hit E right here, and that's fine. And then I could drag this to trigger in. and that would work perfectly. These will now work. It looks a little bit ugly though, because, well, you have a wire just going right across the middle of your submarine. So what I'm going to do here is drag this back into my inventory, and I can hit 2 to put it in my other hand. All right, so to route wires, you connect one end. All right, so I connect my trigger out here, and now I have my wire that moves around with me. To route them, you can just click. That makes it stop, and you can start making your you can route it in whatever direction you want. To get rid of these, you can just right click, and that'll get rid of one dot. If I right click enough times, I will get back to my original. So for here, I want it to route it like it'll come up out of here, across here, down through here, across and over. So if I click right here, that should put a little point right there, and then I can click right here, that puts a point there. Click down here, that'll put a point there. Across here, that puts one there, and then I can just jump in here, hit E, and connect this. Oops, see, I've connected that to the pump like a moron. What I actually want to be doing is bringing this down here, and then across here, and then connecting to my railgun, connect that to trigger in. Now the wire is all nice and hidden. It looks nice. So now I'm going to do the same thing for position. So I can click on my blue wire over here. That gives me a blue wire in my hand. E on the periscope, position out. So this is going to be giving the, it'll be outputting a degree. And now that this, I'm going to wire the same way. It'll go up here, over here, down here. And then I suppose I can just go straight down. One thing you can do is you can like click over here, get this node, and then like say I click up here and connect this to my position in, right? So that'll be giving a degree, an angle to this gun to decide where it's pointing. And now with my screwdriver in my hand, I can click on this wire and I can drag this node around to wherever I want. So let's say I get rid of my wall so I can see my wires more clearly. I'm like, oh, that looks gross. I can drag this to be kind of wherever I want it. Yeah, that's the basic of wiring. The other thing that this gun is going to be needing is power. You can see. So I will be getting power from, well, the generator, or the reactor generates their power, and then you can see that they've connected this power to this here junction box, and then that junction box is in turn connected to those batteries as well as the next junction box, and they go to all these junction boxes are just splitters, right? You can put one, you have 5 connections all told. So if you bring power in, then you can send power out from 4 different wires, and thereby connect that to another junction box, get another 4, and you get all the connections you need. So I can just look through. It looks like all these junction boxes might be full. See, this one already has 5 there, so I can't connect any power there. Looks like all of these ones are already full. So if I wanted to connect this railgun to power, I would have to either find a junction box with an open power slot, or some other, get another junction box. So one way I could do that is add another junction box here. So if I exit my wiring mode, click on this, copy this one over, then come back into wiring mode, click E on this, I could disconnect, like here, this lamp. That goes to the lamp in the crew quarters. So if I click on that, that disconnects it. I can drag it into my inventory to disconnect it completely. Hit 2 to make sure it's in my hand. Now this lamp has no power, but I'll come back to that lamp in a second here. Because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this newfound slot that I have to connect that to power there, and then I'm going to just connect that directly to the power of this junction box. And now I have 4 new slots that I can have. If I click on my red wire here, got a red wire, connect that to power, and I can rewire up this lamp down here just by, click, E, power. And now that lamp again has power. And then I have more slots open, so I can click my red wire, connect that to power, and route this through my cables down to my coil gun and give it power. And now this coil gun should be fully functioning. Make sure your angles are right, and make sure it has position, trigger, and power. You can also add a toggle light signal so that you can have the light off or on, because the guns do come with built-in lights. I don't really see any reason you'd want to turn the lights off. I guess maybe some creatures wouldn't come after you if you didn't have lights on or something like that. I just want to say a few things about lighting. There's two like different types of lights. There's types of lights that take power, like lamps, and then there's types of lights that don't take power, like emergency lights, as well as lighting components. I believe these are called light components. So if I just search up lights, I don't really get. Oops, misspelled that. Search up lights, I don't really get much. I found it's easier if you just go into electrical, and then you can kind of scroll through here. You've got lots of different options for lamps. These all require power, but if you hover over like the emergency light here, you can see it says requires no electrical input. Same is true for the light components. Requires no electrical input. Requires no electrical input. It's it's simple as that. Ballasts, emergency lights. Because you don't want to have to. Because the more powered lights you have, the more wiring you're gonna have to do. And you can see this, the Orca here, which is a relatively small submarine, already has, what's that, 7 junction boxes up there, plus 3 or 4 over here, which is 11, and I added another one, a 12th one, so I could wire a second gun there. So more lamps equals a lot more wires, which can be really annoying. So you want to use emergency lights if you can. Like I said, in ballast tanks or places where you're not really going to be hanging out in a lot. But places like the bridge and engineering and stuff, you're probably going to want real lights. Although, yeah, so these people have like 1 lamp there. You can also use these much larger lamps for, more lighting. You can see it defaults to off, so if I click on it, I can click the is on button to see what it'll light. But if I were to, even though this is clicked is on, if I were to load into a game, it wouldn't be on because I don't have any power to it. So I would have to wire that in using my new junction box that I've created there. That's why these light components and these emergency lights are so useful, because they're like, I don't know, bioluminescent or something that doesn't require electricity.